how much guilt is it okay for an entire profession to feel, sustain, be floating in? We are floating in this crap. We feel guilty. We get guilted by clients who think we're just in it for the money. We get guilted by bosses or colleagues when we can't swap a shift because we want to see our families. We get guilted by ourselves when we don't live up to expectations. We're getting guilted when we leave toxic teams for our own mental health because we leave people behind. Guilt, 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 guilt. I mean, guilt, you know what guilt is? Guilt is like this, is the emotion that erupts or boils up from inside when you're doing something that is in conflict with your values. So the first thing is be grateful that you feel a little bit of guilt, because it means you're not a psychopath, which is great. You actually experience something deep inside that is a trigger. Remember, emotions are just triggers that something's going on. They're things to pay attention to that are trying to suggest that you take some form of an action. So they're very useful. The problem that we have is we get wrapped up in the storytelling that follows on from the guilt. Like the client makes us feel guilty because we have asked for some money to pay for a service, an out-of-hours call, an operation. I remember carrying guilt for a dog. It was a young dog. It needed surgery. It was eminently fixable, and the client couldn't afford it, and so they opted for euthanasia. And I felt guilty for ages about that. I still have moments where I think back to it where I don't, it's not guilt. I feel some way regretful that the system wasn't different, that I couldn't have paid for that thing, right? But it's when these things are unresolved and they turn into ongoing, unhelpful storytelling that just fuels an emotional fire inside us that it becomes a massive problem. So when the client guilts you or gives you feedback, because they don't guilt you, they give you feedback that, or they make a statement that makes you feel a certain way. The client doesn't make you feel guilty. You make you feel guilty, right? And they say something like, oh, well, you're just in it for the money. I can't afford to pay that amount of money. If you really cared, then you'd do it. But that's just nonsense. And that's not them thinking longer term about the impact of you. You attribute way more weight and attention to the words that are coming out of their mouth than they actually do. Because come tomorrow, I'll absolutely guarantee you, they won't remember the words they used. So something's said because somebody's not getting life on their terms, which happens, right? We have to charge for our stuff, so none of you should feel guilty about that ever. They say something when they're angry that then you internalize, and then you use that to beat yourself up for not being a good enough version of you, which is just nonsense. Because if they hadn't have said it and they'd have just said, hey doc, I can't afford that, I'm not going to come on, and hung up, you probably wouldn't have felt that guilty. It was words they used that then created a situation in yourself. And this is what we're just not good at. If you're getting wrecked by guilt, like there's kind of a newsflash here. Like unless you actually are a murderer, some form of bad member of the human race who steals things, burns things, blows things up, kills things knowingly, guilt has very little place as a long-term emotion in you. Particularly not if you examine the underlying cause. Like, is the thing that you feel guilty about genuine, and does it really matter to you? Do you actually have to feel guilty about that? And you have to take a rational stare at this and look at this situation, and then look at yourself in the mirror. Again, you need to, I've said this before and I'll say it again, you need to remove yourself from being on the stage of the act of your life, because that's when you're playing everything out, you're all tangled up in it, and move yourself up into the director's box where you can objectively look at what's going on and rationally go, okay, well, I kind of feel crummy about that. What is that emotion? It might be guilt, it might be anger, it might be frustration. Okay, fine, let's just acknowledge that, but then let's rationally go, well, what are the facts of the matter here? A client wishes their animal to be seen because their animal is unwell. Perfectly reasonable thing for them to do. I have told them it's going to be £100, £200, dollars, whatever, to see me at this time of the evening because it's an emergency service. Perfectly reasonable thing to do. No one has to feel guilty so far. The conflict comes from one person's need for service, but the resources not matching that. Now, if anyone should feel guilty about that, it's the person who has taken on the responsibility of ownership that is not able to meet that need, right? It's like driving a car and not having insurance. It's irresponsible and stupid, right? And if you don't take out insurance, then you've kind of left yourself wide open and you are the one that's feeling guilty, right? But the pet owner in those situations is turning something around on you. Not really because long term they think you're a bad human being, but because in the short term they become angry and they lack the emotional intelligence themselves to own their responsibility, which is rife in this world, right? So they say something, now I internalize that guilt, and I use that guilt to then start storytelling that they're bad people and I don't like clients, and veterinary medicine terrible because we're in the situation where we have to feel guilt all the time, and I'm not going to swap, you know, a colleague asked me to swap a shift pattern and I can't do that because I've got something else and I feel more guilt, you know, and I'm going to move jobs because this toxic culture I work in is awful and I can't take everyone with me, all of the same people that are part of the toxic culture, so why would you want to take them with you? The point is, you're in control of you. You're not in control of other people. What's important is that when you make a decision, you make it for reasons that you're comfortable with. If you're not comfortable with sending a pet away that you could fix, but that's what you're having to do in your job every day, then you need to find a job where that trade-off doesn't exist. So that might be working in a rescue or a shelter, right? Or it might be setting up your own business where you create a system that works for you. If you're working in a situation where that is not the situation, you can't control that, then it's time to get hold of your emotional state and ask yourself rationally, is this a problem? Is it not a problem? What's really going on? And really beware the storytelling, the story arc you get into yourself where you're a bad person and the guilt is coming from there. Experience emotions, recognize them, be aware of them, but be aware of the trap that you can fall into by constantly recycling the emotion in storytelling, and try really hard to tell yourself a different, better story that serves you. Your enjoyment of this profession depends on that. And be safe, be well, and be happy.